The Trial is one of the most profound books I have ever read in my life. It's about isolation, alienation, despair, and tragedy. And though it is very sad, it still is very complex, absurd, and moving in a way that many people don't originally see. It was written by Franz Kafka, who is personally maybe my favorite writer ever, and The Trial may be one of my favorite books ever, too. But it all sort of starts going back to the writer's actual life. And once we delve into that and go into his life, we can understand him as a person and how his personal life influenced his works. Kafka was living in France, and a lot of his suffering and misery boils down to his relations with his father. His father, Hermann Kafka, was a like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, rough and gritty guy who was all about work ethic because he himself was in the lower class and he worked very hard to get himself into the upper middle class with a business he created on his own, and so he expected a lot from Kafka because he himself was survivalistic and he thought that the world was like man against man, and if you don't pull yourself up, you're going to fall apart. So he put a lot of pressure on Franz. But Franz, unfortunately, was exactly the opposite of his father. He was very introspective. He loved literature. He was shy and anxious, and he kept to himself a lot. He wasn't loud and big and strong and projected like his father did. So this caused a big clash, and the two didn't really go together well. So he submitted Kafka to a lot of unnecessary suffering that sort of ruined Kafka's life, but also gave him the motivation for all of his works. So when we go to the trial, specifically, the trial is about a character named Joseph K. Now, Joseph K is just a normal guy. He's living in his apartment, and one random day, the authorities come into his house and they accuse him of being guilty of a crime that they cannot explain. So Joseph K is very confused. He's like, well, what was my crime? And he keeps pressing them further, and they're very elusive. They never explicitly answer what his crime is, and they keep sort of like backpedaling. And the dialogue's very funny and witty and obscure, and it's just so absurd because they never explain to him what happens, and he is just constantly throughout the story left more and more confused, even more confused than the audience is while reading this. When I first read this, I honestly just thought it was terrible because I was so confused. And I was like, what could this possibly mean? Like, what is the point of this? And then once I further read it and I then later reread it again, everything sort of began to piece itself together. I began to actually understand what the purpose the writer was trying to get across. And so, later in the story, he keeps meeting with more people. He gets into some relationship with women, and he even goes in to try to uncover and like really try to understand what his sentence is. He never ends up understanding his sentence, and at the end, he just dies. And it's very sad, but basically the whole point is you can clearly see where Kafka's life comes into this. Kafka in his work life, he obviously really wanted to be a writer, and obviously since his dad was so like intense and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and bureaucracy and like work and tough and gritty, he was very against this, and so he didn't let Kafka do that, and he forced him to go to law school. Kafka hated law school, and he just constantly thought of wanting to travel the world and become a writer. And he hated school, he hated law, he hated everything about it. He just wanted to get out. eventually he left that job, but eventually he just started working in another firm, and he was just caught in the same cycles, the same endless cycles that he just couldn't find himself getting out of. It was safe to say that Kafka was miserable at his job, but he was also miserable inside. He was constantly anxious. He had some complex relationships with women, and he just wanted to write, but he never gave up on that dream. He continued to write on the side, but with the constant stresses of his job and all of the other things going on, he really struggled to finish his works. Sometimes he would just stop and he would leave certain things unanswered. But basically, the entire point of the trial, the way that it connects to his life the most, is bureaucracy. Is you see, he thinks that essentially humanity is compiled with all these different unnecessary components that people don't understand, and they try to enforce rule, tell people to do things that they themselves don't agree with and don't even understand. Hence why the officers who go into his house can't actually explain to him what he does, and he is guilty until proven innocent, charged with something that no one understands. And his whole life is a series of these unfortunate events, and things just continue to spiral into chaos. The trial is an allegory for life itself, saying that every single day we are confronted with a trial. We are put on the spot, guilty until proven innocent. We never asked for this life or all of the struggles that we have, yet we are guilty of all of the consequences that come along with it. Kafka was miserable and anxious and depressed and introspective and all of these other things, but he used this suffering and this misery to pour it into a work that he thought was larger than himself. He was very focused on purpose. He wrote letters and all these other things. And I think that The Trial is one of the greatest books ever, not just because of its message, because it's so absurd and it's so intact with human life and human suffering itself. This book motivated me to write a lot of the works I create, and I just love it more than anything. I love Kafka too. So I don't know, maybe I missed some things. I would love to hear your guys' opinions of it down in the comments below, but then again, nobody really watches my videos anyway, so why do I even try? No, but anyway, The Trial is very interesting, and it's imaginative, and it's weird, and I wish there were more creations like this. But like I said, I would like to hear your thoughts and maybe even what book or writer I should dive into next.